Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we pick up the pieces from a lost weekend for the Milwaukee Bucks and preview one of the two biggest games remaining on the schedule later tonight against the Indiana Pacers. Camille and I dig into that after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not done so yet, you can still sign up for free at lockedondaily.com and get your day started with the all-new and free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Camille, you went over this on last night's show with Van Fias about the recap of the Bucks' loss to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and not a whole lot in terms of developments or things that have changed worthy of updates between that game and now as we get set for this matchup with the Indiana Pacers. So we're going to take a look back at what occurred in that game and take a look at this Pacers opponent the Bucks have. But, one of the things that I know you and Van talked about, and actually Van and I were talking about this as well as we were leaving the arena, as we both kind of finished at the same time, was just the attitude from Giannis and a few others in that locker room after the loss. And I obviously don't get a chance to hear that in real time with post-game duties, but Van was kind of filling me in, and I went back and listened to it and thought, yeah, that was interesting. Like, to hear the way Giannis and a few others projected themselves after this. Like, we've heard Giannis, I don't know if you would say like sound the alarm, but you've heard a more agitated and more of a sense of urgency from Giannis at times when it's necessary. That was not the tone after this loss to the Cavaliers. Like, I know Van had said, like, I think they're pretty confident. Like, yeah, we'll see in the playoffs. Things are a lot different. And that's what kind of came through to me when I listened to the post-game audio. And look, you're 0-4, so the Cavaliers are going to have a ton of confidence. But the tone that I got from that was Giannis saying, yeah, I think we tried some things that didn't work. We passed the ball and moved from side to side. I think we overthought things, and like, their length didn't really concern us. And I think this team feels like, you know what, this is who we're likely going to get in the second round, with the big caveat that they get out of the first round for the first time in some time. But we're perfectly fine with that.
That's the vibe that I got as well when I was able to actually hear the post-game comments from Giannis and the crew, of just like a quiet confidence about them, where it's like, we know the numbers don't support the way that we feel, but we have a lot of trust in what we have in this locker room. I remember, I think it was like a month or so ago, when Damian Lillard was talking about how he felt about playing against some of those top teams in the East. And he's like, the Cavs, the first two games, they were close. I feel like we match up well with Boston. I know it doesn't look like it, but like, that's how we feel about it. And seeing how this team is coming together so far after the trade deadline, like, yes, this past weekend was an unfortunate one. And I think that there are certain things that this weekend did show that you continue to watch for in the growth of this team as they end the season, most importantly when it comes to their offense. But overall, you get a sense from the guys on this team that they don't feel like they don't have enough. Like, they feel like they have enough. They just have to execute at a better level. I did think it was interesting hearing Doc Rivers talk about how he felt the ball wasn't moving enough, and then hearing Giannis say, like, it was too much side-to-side movement. We should have been going downhill. We were overthinking a little bit. And hearing the juxtaposition of those two answers about the offense, which has been the offense has been like the problem with this team, which is so weird to say, but that's the part that's been like lagging behind the defense. So to hear the different perspectives as to what the problem was in that Cavaliers game from Doc and from Giannis was really interesting to me.
Yeah, and that was kind of what stood out to me the most too, was you heard the juxtaposition of Doc talking about trust in the pass and how much that kind of shined through in what he saw with some of the struggles over the weekend as a whole, and said, look, the big difference, it's not only comparing the two teams. If you look back at the first game that we played against the Cavaliers and you look back at this game, in that first game, we trusted the pass, and like, we had no reason to at that point. That's way back when the Bucks weren't hitting shots and everything just didn't look like it was headed in a good spot. But we trusted the process in the past, and we didn't in this one. And you looked at the Cavaliers; they did their ball movement, and that was one of the big stories, which I think kind of matched the eye test of what we saw for that game. And then to hear Giannis say, like, yeah, I think we were overthinking things. I think we were trying to get the perfect shot. We were moving from side to side. We weren't throwing the ball into the paint. And these are all things like we feel like we'll adjust, and we feel like we'll be in a good spot against this team.
Yeah, man. I think an important part of it is just the quality of the pass as well. Like the biggest difference between watching how the Cavaliers move the ball and how the Bucks move the ball was that a lot of the Cavaliers' movement was created off of them getting those paint touches, getting downhill, being able to break the defense down, and then moving the ball from there, passing up good shots for great shots. Whereas for the Bucks, the Cavaliers defense didn't have to really scramble too much. It was a lot of like, if the ball is being moved around, it wasn't really moving the defense as well. It was just moving the ball. So I think that when you look at this Bucks team, and a big question around them post deadline has been just outside of Dame and Giannis, where is the shot creation going to come from? Who is going to have that ability? And it's been different guys, different nights. It's just that against the Cavaliers, you didn't get much from many other guys. When you need a few to step up, it just wasn't the case. Like a Gary Trent Jr. first game back, so I don't fault him for that at all. He started off the game with a quick 5 points in the first quarter and then went cold after that point. But that's just the way that it shakes out sometimes. Was like, can we get the quality of shots to be better and more consistent that way? And that's what I thought you saw a lot coming out of the break when this Bucks were on that 7-1, run coming out of the break. The offense still, like the numbers alone were still like it's lagging a little bit, but you were seeing the double digit guys, you were seeing the assist numbers higher. So like the Bucks have to find the right balance of how to move the ball, using the ball to create disadvantages with the defense. But I think Giannis has a point too of also just knowing when to attack the one-on-one matchup, because you saw the Cavaliers do that as well, where they're hunting certain matchups. If they get it, then they try to exploit it.
Yeah, and that last point too about Gary Trent Jr., like his first game back after a hyperextended knee, which obviously was on the mild side if he's back only after a couple of games. But against a team like the Cavs, you just felt like, man, you need role players to really have big games. And I mean, that's what stood out to me in watching the Cavaliers on Sunday night, Camille, was they didn't have anybody score 20 points. And it felt like they were in control of the game for the last 36 minutes of the game. And I made the point too about this. You know what? Actually, let's save this for the next segment about some of the things that we see in Cleveland. And then, of course, taking a look to a big one tonight against the Indiana Pacers. So some of the things that jumped out about this Cleveland Cavaliers team, who the Bucks may well see once again as we get into the playoffs. We'll get into that conversation coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Skims. When I found out Skims was making underwear for men, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family, so I had to give it a try. And I can tell you it lives up to the hype. I've always had issues with underwear, whether it be fit, comfort, or just finding the right style for me. I'm sure you guys have as well. Skims can change all of that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. Many options to choose, whether it be those options we outlined. Maybe you're a boxer brief guy. You try that, you'll get hooked. They're perfect for your active lifestyle. They move with you. They never lose their shape. They stay in place all day, whether you're working out or running errands. They're the most comfortable and reliable underwear you will ever put on and that I have ever owned. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing, almost like you're wearing nothing at all. Shop Skims Men's at skims.com/LockedOnNBA and at Skims stores. Let them know we sent you after you place your order. Select podcast in the survey and select our store from the drop-down menu that follows. Again, let them know we sent you. Select podcast in the survey, select Locked On NBA in that drop-down menu that follows when you check out Skims. So I made the point last night on the radio post-game show, Camille, and just watching this Cavs team, 54-10, right? Like,
Yeah.
First of all, the fact that they've lost 10 games all season, and they have a 3-game losing streak on their resume is the most astounding thing. They matched the Boston Celtics and then went over the Bucks for the only 2 teams in league history that have had win streaks of 14 games or more and scored 110 points in each of those wins. But, mentioning the fact that nobody scored 20 and seeing the moments in that game where Donovan Mitchell's on the bench and the lead grows, or Darius Garland is out, and how they kind of stagger both of their bigs, they almost kind of remind me of the 2019-20 Milwaukee Bucks, who I think at one point were 40-6 after that win over the Charlotte Hornets in Paris. And they were, for the longest time, on pace to win over 70 games that season until the final stretch of games before a pandemic shut things down on March 11th, when I think they went into that break with 3 straight losses. But that Bucks team, and not only the record and how they've kind of jumped on teams and blown out a lot of teams, the multiple win streaks, that was the year the Bucks won 18 in a row. The way that they can do it with their bench. And we went through these conversations that year after year after year, about the difference between regular season depth and playoff depth. I'm not trying to take away from what the Cleveland Cavaliers are doing, but I think this is ultimately the big question surrounding Cleveland, is how much of this is postseason depth, where when you get into the conversation of, hey, who would you rather play? And I had a few people bring it up to me yesterday, and I talked about it with a few others as well, even after that game. If you could choose, and again, as we've seen, getting to the second round has been a big F for this Bucks team. But if you could choose one of those 2 teams to play, who would you rather select, the Celtics or the Cavaliers? I got to tell you, I'm a little surprised that it's still overwhelming. People are choosing the Cavs as the team that they would most like to play.
There's still going to be a healthy level of respect for the Celtics because they have shown that their formula can win
a championship.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like they're the defending champ. So I think there's just automatically going to be a level of respect for Boston of like, hey, we know that they're not as elite as they were last year, but they are still playing really good basketball. They're a team that you have to respect. We know that it can work. You've seen Al Horford out here still moving his feet, looking like he has the fountain of youth somewhere in his backyard that he keeps heading to. So, like, I understand why people are saying that. And it's because the Cavs haven't proved it yet. We just haven't seen that this formula can work. It's been a great story during the regular season, but we haven't seen it work. And I say that to say, just because we haven't seen it work doesn't mean that it won't. Like that Bucks team, we were talking a lot about, like, if there was no pandemic, how would that have played out for them come playoff time? There's a lot of questions around them being young and if they could be able to bounce back and if they can handle it. And man, we'll never know. We'll never know. But luckily, there's no other pandemic that shuts the world down ahead of these
as
playoffs
of right
here.
now.
Right. To see how it shakes out. But honestly, whether it's Boston or Cleveland, that's going to be a tough matchup because one thing that Cleveland does have is just a lot of different options and length and size. They're a very active defensive team. And on nights like last night, when Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell don't really have it, so to speak, they were able to generate enough offense elsewhere. Like they're just a well-rounded, good team. And I will be curious to see once they get to the playoffs, what does their 8-man rotation look like? Or do they keep it like a 9-man rotation for the play? Like that seems a little large for the playoffs. So I'm curious to see how it shakes out, but it could just be a situation like what we've been talking about with the Bucks of like matchup dependent. It's just going to depend on what we need in this particular matchup against this particular team. And Cleveland has a few different options that they can throw out there.
I mean, I will fully admit we're putting the cart before the horse here to get into the who would you rather play. I mean, my answer is I would rather play neither of those 2 teams if at all possible. I don't know. Like I keep kind of straddling the fence and changing my mind with each week. It seems like, I mean, look, you pointed out too, the whole notion of like, well, we haven't seen Cleveland do it before. And can they deal with adversity? I mean, that was one of the big hangups with that Bucks team too. You didn't have to deal with any adversity that regular season. The only adversity they really dealt with in the season prior was once the series was tied or you were down 3-2 in the conference finals. I mean, they blew through the Detroit Pistons and won that series by over 100 points. They if you want to say adversity, but it was still game one of a series. I mean, they lost by 20 on the home floor to the Celtics and then won 4 straight games to a Celtics team that was just unraveling at the seams. So yeah, it wasn't until like their final 2 games of that season that they really had to face adversity, and didn't face it until the bubble in that following season. So you never know how players and teams are going to react to that until they actually go through it. But this Cleveland group, where I keep kind of coming back to, I don't know, is we said these same things about the Bucks going into that title year in 2021, and they made some tinkering, but the majority of that group was together through those playoff failures and grew from it and learned how to win. And I think you can make a strong case that's what we're seeing here in Cleveland now. So between that and the fact that we just, in this era, unless you're a super team like the Warriors, we don't see teams repeat. That's why I keep kind of hovering back to, I don't know. I mean, again, I'd say neither, but I'm not so ready to say, yeah, the playoffs are a different story and I don't trust the Cavs.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, which again is part of why I think the Bucks staying in that 4 seed, or maybe catching the Knicks in the 3 seed with the injuries that they've been facing with Brunson right now. Regardless, home court. That's my point. I know the 3 seed. You're like, come on, like we ain't got. But technically, it's in play.
It's technically in play. I think this weekend evaporated
like
your hopes of a 3 seed, because like I've talked about this with a few people before, and we're recording this Monday night. The Knicks are about to play as we record this. So if the Knicks lose, I mean, maybe you can get me not so much talked into it, but not quite ready to fully write it off. But the Knicks have 19 games left. The Bucks have 19 games left. You're 5 games back of the Knicks. You got to outplay the Knicks by 5 games the rest of the way. So 19 games and 5 games to make up. Like, I know I went through the exercise a couple of days ago of like, you'd need the Knicks to go this record. Like, even in these final 19, if the Knicks go 9-10, you got to outperform that by 5 games. So you got to go 14-5 with a very, very challenging schedule the rest of the way. And just the notion too, like, I think Jalen Brunson's probably going to miss more than 2 weeks, the way that they termed it. Yeah. But I just don't think Jalen Brunson all of a sudden makes the Knicks like a team that wins. The absence of it makes the Knicks a team that wins 40% of their games. And that's pretty much what the Bucks are going to need.
Yeah, they're going to need that luck. But even if they don't get the 3 seed, maintaining the 4 seed,
they could get the 6.
Yeah, like we don't want them to drop below that 4 line. I think home court advantage for the Bucks is going to be really important, especially if they're only going to have it for 1 round, especially the round we haven't seen them get out the first round in the last 2 years here. So for me, it's like, listen, the second round is going to be tough regardless, because you're going to be looking to play against Cleveland or Boston, or if things got wonky, I guess New York in some way. But regardless of that, like, you're going to have to play one of these teams that you have shown throughout the regular season that you have not yet been able to really beat. So it's going to be a series of prove it for the Bucks, regardless of who that is across from them. I mean, that's just how it's going to go for them. So I think them being able to get home court in the first round, if that first round matchup is the Pacers or the Pistons, those are teams that they've shown that they can compete with, that they can beat. Again, Tuesday's game against the Pacers is going to be a really interesting one. I know the Pacers are going to be on the second night of a back-to-back. So if you're looking at it for like a playoff perspective, there might not be much you can gather from it there, but it's a matchup that you should pay attention to, not just because of last year, but because there's a high chance of probability that you get a repeat of that series in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, some thoughts on that is we'll take a look ahead to that matchup with the Pacers, and looking back to this game against the Chicago Bulls and who they're going to once again be without, what that means for the game against the Bucks. We'll take a look at that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, your home should reflect your style, and with Wayfair, it's easier than ever to make that happen. Whether you're looking for a simple refresh or tackling a big home project, Wayfair has everything you need in one place. Wayfair's huge selection makes it easy to find the perfect piece, no matter your space or budget. From cozy furniture and stylish decor to kitchen essentials and outdoor must-haves. Wayfair has it all and at prices that fit your budget. If you're looking for a new rug to tie your living room together, Wayfair has many stylish options at great prices. The site makes it easy and simple to compare styles, and your order will arrive fast with free delivery. You'll be surprised to find everything from storage solutions to patio decor, making it your go-to for all things home. Head over to wayfair.com and find something that's just your style today. That's wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So again, the Pacers are playing the Bulls as we're recording this, and they are playing without Tyrese Halliburton. This is what, third consecutive game he has now missed with that hip flexor strain. Pacers have yet to win a game this season in which Tyrese Halliburton has been unavailable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I suppose we should have checked in with Tony for this, but I would assume he plays in this game because it's a home game. He did make the trip to Chicago and was going through shoot around, but I would assume he plays. And I don't know if it was hey, it was close over the weekend and this was just it's a back-to-back. We're going to play him at home and sit him in this Bulls game. But you mentioned, I don't know if you take a little bit off of it because it's a back-to-back. I mean, I'm assuming the Pacers are going to approach this just as the Bucks approach this weekend, because Indiana, you don't want to use the word have to because of how close these teams are. But I mean, the Pacers, if they drop one of these two games, they lose out on the tiebreaker. So with these two teams separated by just a half game at this moment, it's not quite as imperative as the Bucks and Knicks discussion. But I mean, I expect everybody to be a full go for the Pacers in this one.
Possibly could be. I mean, the Pacers, they go as Halliburton goes. You mentioned that they haven't been able to win when he hasn't played so far this season. And even when he does play, if Tyrese Halliburton isn't looking like the guy that we saw last year, where he's able, to score 20
in the
points
first half of the year. Yeah.
Like they're also not going to look good. This team is really driven by Tyrese Halliburton. So I'll be really curious to see if he does play, or if the Pacers are approaching it similar to other teams that we've seen where they're like, yes, we know seeding is important. We want to make sure that we don't fall below that 6 line so that we know that we're in the playoffs. But like what we're prioritizing is to be healthy. And however else that falls is how that falls. But we just want to make sure we're healthy because we know that if Tyrese is good, that we have a really, really strong chance at playing here. So I'm really curious to see what that looks like for them tomorrow. Him sitting out tonight, as he has the last couple of games, makes it seem like that Milwaukee return could be it for him. But we'll see once the injury reports come out. But it's not even just the Halliburton piece of it, but just the back-to-back aspect of it. Like, teams have to play him. We know it. And if you lose it, you lose the game.
We certainly know it.
Yeah. So it's like, hey, if you lose, you lose. It is what it is. But we know come playoff time, there are no back-to-back. So the situation will always look a little bit different. But Pacers Bucks is one of those series, especially after last year now, where I whenever they're playing, like I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited for it. Can't wait to see how Giannis responds. Like, it's always a fun one to me now.
Yeah, I mean, Giannis, the fact that, we had some concerns, or at least had an elevated view of things going into the break and coming out of it with the calf issue, and the fact that we've seen Giannis going full go here, even that minutes restriction, we're not talking about that anymore suddenly, and Giannis is playing in back-to-backs, Damian Lillard as well. Like, we've seen the full version of the Bucks coming out of the break here. So I think that certainly adds to it. I expect to see the same thing from the Pacers. Tyrese Halliburton missed a game earlier this year against the Cavaliers. They lost that. And then, of course, the two games over the weekend, or late last week and into the weekend in Atlanta against the Hawks, they lost those 2 games, and now missing this game in Chicago against the Bulls. So we'll see if that means it's 0-4 in games where Tyrese Halliburton does not play. And if that's the case, you're going to go into that game tomorrow knowing, hey, worst case scenario, even if we lose this game, we're still tied in the standings with the Pacers, and we still hold the tiebreaker by winning 2 of the first 3 games. So you got a chance at that, or you could extend it to 2 games and lock up the tiebreaker, and then it starts to move closer to that conversation we've had about just how challenging it's going to be to catch the Knicks, especially if you're able to take both of these games against Indiana. That in theory would give you at least a 3-game lead over the Pacers in the standings at the moment of that game going final on Saturday, and then you would still have that tiebreaker to tack on another game. I mean, at that point, we'll have 17, 16 games left. At that point, I might be ready to call it, Camille, if you can take both of those against Indiana. But yeah, we'll see. It's definitely going to be a very anticipated game, and we've made the point a couple of times. The Cavs game that did not go your way, and then the Knicks game at the very end of the month. Those are probably your 2 most anticipated games, but those 2 games with the Pacers, as of right now, those are your most important games, and maybe that eventually becomes the 2 games to the Pistons that become your most important games.
I think that's going to be the case for the Bucks as the season goes. Like every next game, like this, hey, this one's important because
okay.
It's going to be important down the stretch.
So
here.
Not so much that you think the Pistons are going to move past the Pacers. You just think as we continue to get in the season, like, nope, now this is the most important game.
Yep. I think it's going to keep on. The ball's going to keep moving for this team, just how everything else is going and shaking out.
In closing here, I was talking about this with Van and somebody else yesterday at the arena when we were talking about the schedule in front of the Bucks and more back-to-backs. I don't want to complain about working here, but I mean, I could do without 2 straight weekends of back-to-backs. Like maybe we can balance this out, and I'll deal with weekday back-to-backs, but I'd kind of love to have a Saturday and Sunday every now and then. But we were talking about that and the schedule, and you got the Oklahoma City Thunder on night 2 of the back-to-back next weekend. And just talking about some other things too. Of Van was the first one that brought it up. Of the NBA Cup championship game played. It counts as a game played for Giannis. It doesn't count statistically, but that counts towards the All NBA requirement, the minimum games requirement. And then we were just kind of kicking around. Well, why don't they change more with this? Like, case in point, the easiest fix, and you and I have talked about this before, and now when you look at the standings, you'd really beg for it this year, but can we just make the win count? So like none of the statistics count, the win counts. Even if it shows up as an 83rd game played, fine. It means you hold the tiebreaker in any scenario. So even if you caught the New York Knicks with your losses, you'd have one more win than the Knicks. Even though they won the head-to-head tiebreaker, you finish in front of them. You'd hold over the Pacers, the Pistons. Like that to me is such an easy change. I'm almost confused why we wouldn't make that adjustment this summer. So get your thoughts on that. And then the other thing that was suggested was, well, and this is the bigger, like, all right, now we're getting really complicated, but the 2 teams that play in the NBA Cup championship, there's a decent chance you will not have played that team yet because it's
at that point
in the other conference, and you usually put it off later. So if you win that game, you should just be able to write off the road game you have against that team and say, no, we count this. We're keeping the home game, and it takes 1 game off the schedule there.
See, y'all getting fancy with that second one now. Like I can see the logistical.
Good luck talking the teams into giving up that revenue for a game. Yeah.
I think that the NBA is so tied to the history of the league. I'm saying like 82 that we always had, and that's the why.
Adam Silver's already talking about 40 minutes.
I know. Which no, let's not do that, Adam. Let's not do 40-minute, 10-minute quarters. Nah, let's not do that. But appreciate the brainstorming around the game, and I just think that the 82 line is where he's like, we got to keep that, which is probably why he suggested the 40 minutes in the first place. Of like, we can still keep 82, so you still see that. But we're going to take away 8 minutes per game, which would just crash role play. That's not this conversation right now. But for the NBA Cup, I do like that the game currently does count towards that 65 game minimum threshold for players. That's a big one, especially because it if you don't hit that 65 mark, it can mess up a lot of dollars for players because of the different things you can qualify for, especially if you have contractual stipulations in your contract about hitting certain marks. So it's important for that. But I do like the idea of it counting like in the standings somehow. I just feel like
it's even easier. Like we don't have to even count it as the 83rd game. Like you don't have to say, let's say, I mean, they're not going to get here, but let's say the Bucks finish 50-32. You don't have to say the Bucks are actually 51-32. You can just leave 50-32, but they hold the tiebreaker. So like when you go back and look, oh, how did the Bucks finish there when they lost X amount of games? They won the NBA Cup. So that's
Yeah,
the ultimate
you can do
tiebreaker.
it that way. That'll work too.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, it seems like a very, very easy change. We've seen them
Mhm.
continue to tinker with this thing. Maybe we're just lashing out because tiebreaker is going to be very important for the Bucks this season. And in a season where so far you're 0-9 against the top 3 records in your conference, you'll take any minor win you can get.
I know that's right, and they're gonna need it continuing to go forward. So, again, we've talked about just the month of March and how difficult it was going to be for this team. You mentioned another back-to-back this upcoming weekend for the Bucks. So, and that's right before they take off for their West Coast trip at that. So it's a tough schedule. So you know what? I am going to say the next game for the Bucks is always the most important game for them going forward. They got to
Well,
continue stacking.
I mean, honestly, I'm going to be very curious to see the injury report on Stone Cold Steve Austin Day, March 16th against the Oklahoma City Thunder, because I would not have the slightest problem if the Bucks just, especially if you win the night before, if the Bucks just said, punting this game. Giannis is out, Dame is out, Brooke is out, because gets the guys an extra day in advance of hitting the road for a 5-game West Coast road trip.
And we've seen how those West Coast trips have treated the Bucks over the last year and a half.
They're going to get a little bit of help here. I mean, I don't think LeBron is going to play in either of those 2 games. He's definitely not playing in the one this week.
So that's disappointing because the LeBron Giannis matchup is always really fun. But when you're thinking about what you have to play in front of you, like, listen, I don't like get the win, whatever's going to make
Perfectly
it
fine.
easier.
Yeah.
But I mean, we did see this Bucks team lose to the LeBronless Lakers as well last year.
Well, D'Angelo
So
Russell's gone though, Camille. So
that
they're
is
good
very
there.
true. That is very true. So it's, I mean, this is the fun part. I've said it before, but competition is fun. And this is the part of the schedule where you get to really see if things have been learned, how they can execute. So it's going to be a fun ride.
It's a fun game too, at least the start of it against the Cavs and the way they started to kind of claw back early in the second half. So yeah, and you like competition, you like those types of games. You got a lot of them coming up here in the month of March and the portions of April as well. Speaking of the Pacers in that matchup, that's our next show coming up here for you. The game recap of that showdown. I believe it's going to be Frank and I handling the recaps on that one. And we're going to have a punchy Frank if the Bucks lose that game. So hopefully things go the Bucks way in that one. That'll do it for today's show, though. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.